Can I just have a show of hands who's heard of Havana Syndrome before this advertised meeting? Not many. Oh, I saw a lot of hands go down, but there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe, yeah, 8 or 9. So it was a thing a while ago, so probably in about, you might have heard it in 2017, 2018. Now there's a little bit of a media blackout on it, and I don't know why. Perhaps the incident's gone down, I'm not sure. There's no statistics, and I'll get to that in a minute. But yes, I will be doing this presentation in Dallas, Texas in July, if I make it. So Havana Syndrome, I've just got a couple of slides about MUFON. Yes, I'm the National Director, so Marie's already introduced that. I'm also a member of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, an affiliate member, and also the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon Medical Coalition, or UAP Medical Coalition. I've only just recently joined that. The organisation is based in Alaska, and Ted Rowe, I don't know, anyone know Ted Rowe here? Yeah, a couple of people know Ted. He goes way back. He's a veteran UFO investigator. So he's the founder of the organisation, and as it says here, the UAP Med provides resources and guidance for medical professionals to address a variety of health effects associated with UAP exposure. Hello. Just lost a bit of audio then. So basically the organisation's there to cater for people who have had exposure to UAPs, which is not many, but I can name a couple of people in Australia in particular, but also for the psychological effects if disclosure happens. So it's the ontological shock that might happen if we disclose too much. So I'm a member of that, and when I joined about 6 months ago, I was given this document to study, and it's the Anomalous Health Incidents Analysis of Potential Cause Mechanisms by the Intelligence Expert Panel. And it was just a task that they gave me, and it was just, Roger, read this and summarise it, and we want to put it on our website. So it was a classified document, and then this guy here, Brad Moss, he's a US attorney. He's obviously very interested in Havana Syndrome as well. It's a bit of a mystery, and he put a FOIA into the CIA and eventually got the document declassified, but it's heavily redacted. So once he did that, it became available to Leslie Keane, and Leslie had handed it out to several people at a conference, but it's now available online. So I read through that, and but the main contents of it is basically a medical analysis of AHI. So when I say AHI, it's like it comes under the umbrella of Havana Syndrome, and also people who have been exposed to UAP close encounters. So people that have had a close encounter and have had effects on them in terms of physiological effects, psychological effects. It comes under both Havana Syndrome and people who have been exposed to UAPs. So they did a medical analysis, they did potential causal mechanisms, they looked at all the different types of radiation that could cause this, electromagnetic energy, acoustic energy, psychological factors, etc., etc. They also looked at chemical and biological agents and ionizing radiation. And a lot of it looks like this. So there's 38 pages like the one on the right, and it's 153. So as a scientist, I find that extremely difficult to study, because as a scientist, the articles are not redacted at all, and you can get as much, all the information you can possibly get that you want, except here, for the first time, I had to deal with a declassified document, and it was really hard. The one on the right, there's a lot more like that, but yeah, redacted in toto, as one Stan Friedman used to once say. So I was asked to write up a summary report, and I didn't do it. I read through it and I thought this is too long, and basically I read more and more about Havana Syndrome because it got me interested. Because I still thought, well, this is really a mystery, a modern day mystery. It's absolutely no one knows what's going on, and so I got really intrigued, and I just kept on reading, and I came up with an hypothesis, and this is why I'm talking to you now. This is my hypothesis as to what Havana Syndrome, or who's causing it, who or what is causing Havana Syndrome. And I'll tell you why. I'll go through the whole analysis. So chapter 1, so what is Havana Syndrome based on what we know so far? I've got a little video here which will turn on now. How do I turn that on? Just another click. So this is a small video that'll just summarize the whole thing.
It started with a weird piercing sound.
It was persistent,
High-pitched
sound, very, very loud.
Those who heard it told newspapers it was soon followed by
strong nausea, and incredible case of vertigo, dizziness.
Excruciating headaches.
these mysterious afflictions were first reported in the Cuban capital.
We might start that again, the volume's a bit low. Yeah, it's too low.
See how we go. Go back.
Backwards. Now.
It started with a weird piercing sound.
It was persistent,
High-pitched
sound, very,
That's good.
very loud.
Those who heard it told newspapers it was soon followed by
strong nausea, an incredible case of vertigo, dizziness.
Excruciating headaches.
these mysterious afflictions were first reported in the Cuban capital in 2016, and they were thus called.
Havana Syndrome.
Havana Syndrome.
Havana Syndrome.
Since then, more cases have been reported in China, Vienna, and now also Berlin. The symptoms were described as
An invisible injury.
many victims reported brain damage without ever sustaining a concussion. What's even stranger is that of about 200 reported cases, nearly half involved CIA agents. That's why these incidents started to look a lot like
Sonic attacks.
Attack of unknown nature, but with a mysterious invisible weapon.
conjectures abounded. The investigations that followed focused on sonic weapons, energy devices, and secret microwave beams. But while speculation like this bends the limits of what's physically possible, some scientists are putting forward a rather unremarkable explanation that has been remarkably overlooked.
Right, so that just gives you a little bit of an idea about what anomalous health incidents are, or Havana Syndrome. So just to summarize what that video said, it's an anomalous medical condition, so no one knows what's going on. It's an anomaly. It started in Havana, Cuba in 2016, December 29th or 30th, I think. Only affects United States and Canadian diplomats and intelligence communities and their families. So isn't that weird? That is absolutely weird, that it's just selecting them. Associated with a sound, sometimes people don't hear the sound, but it could be just that they can't hear it, and some people can. It causes vertigo, nausea, nosebleeds, and mild brain damage in some cases. So it's very serious. Unknown actor and mechanism. So it's a double whammy, unknown, unknown. Following 6 months of research, I formed a leading hypothesis. The pushback on UFO disclosure by the US government is inextricably linked to Havana Syndrome. Did you understand that? It sounds weird. Pushback on UFO disclosure. How is it related to that? Some people said, Roger, you need to go and see a neurologist. And I thought, okay. Maybe I'm mad, maybe I'm not, but here's the evidence. So problems with my research, as I said before, it's a double whammy, unknown, unknown. It's shrouded in secrecy, heavily redacted reports. We can't really make too much of it because, you know, they're not giving us much information, and it's difficult to look for patterns and trends, therefore, and there's no statistical data available. So I looked at this guy's, Einstein once said, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift and the rational mind is a faithful servant. So I relied heavily on my intuition. No statistical data. Why? Why is there no statistical data? We had statistical data on COVID, but nothing, practically nothing on Havana Syndrome. This is as good as you'll get. This is a map done by a reporter in the media. So it only gives you a few locations. So it's probably done in 2021, sorry. And it only gives you the locations. It only gives you one instance in Geneva where there were 3 cases in the summer of 2021. But that's it, nothing else. So I wrote a letter to Leslie Keane asking her, Leslie, do you know where I can gather some statistical data on the incidence of Havana Syndrome? And she wrote back to me and she said, good luck. Most of the interesting stuff is classified. Thank you, Leslie. So basically what I did, I put in a FOIA to the CIA. It's still with them, unfortunately. But I wanted to know the incidence of Havana Syndrome globally. Is it available from the first patient, which was December 2016, patient 0. And I wanted to also know how many individuals are affected per month, so I could do a bit of a correlation. Sex, age, country of origin, most likely United States, Canada. And this is what I got. I got a letter back from them. They apologised, saying that we somehow lost your application, and now we've found it, and basically we're dealing with it. And it came in this envelope, as you can see here, with this heavily masking tape at the back, so it's non-tamper proof. So where do we begin with this? Where do we start? Havana. So Havana Syndrome, as it says, happened in Havana, Cuba. Why? No one's ever asked that question. Why did it happen in Havana, Cuba? Well, they think it's the Russians, but if we look at the history, there is a really good reason why it might be the Russians. There was a lot of in the Cold War period in the early 60s. There was a lot of problems, obviously a lot of bad blood between Cuba, America, and Russia. We had the Bay of Pigs fiasco, which happened in April '61. And the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. So a lot of problems happening in the '60s. If we go back further, in the '40s, just prior to the end of the Second World War, there was the Thing, and the Thing was a listening device that was planted inside this seal, which was a gift to the Americans from the Russians. So, but in the gift, there was this little secret listening device, and it was called the Thing. So the listening device was a little capacitor with an antenna, and it worked off no electronics. It was just embedded in there, this little cutout area, and they'd park a truck outside the US Embassy in Russia, and they'd fire a radio wave on it at a certain frequency, and it would pick that up and the vibrations in the room, and it'd send back another radio wave back to the truck and to a receiver, and then they could listen into what was going on in the embassy. So, and also the US Embassy was hit with microwave radiation between '53 and '76. for quite some time. It was only 5 microwatts per centimetre squared. So why were they doing that? A lot of people think, okay, well, they could be using microwaves now and causing, you know, this Havana Syndrome thing. Problem with that is that in those days, those microwaves were so low in intensity that it didn't affect anybody at all in the building. And basically, they upped it to double the amount, so 10 microwatts. But the whole reason for that is to scramble any signals coming out of the embassy. So it was an anti-espionage thing. It was nothing to do with irradiating the American citizens that were in the US embassy. Plus also there would have been Russians there, so why irradiate your own people? This didn't make sense. So the Biden government actually did look at this. So there was Project Bazaar and Project Pandora. So there were two projects that were looking at the microwaves at this particular time, and basically the Biden government decided to declassify those projects because of the Havana Syndrome incidents in the United States, but it doesn't correlate. So is Russia a state actor in Havana Syndrome, or is it a fall guy? Is it a fall guy? Like, is somebody else doing this, or is something else doing this that's causing this? I spoke to a guy that was an ex-ASIO guy who I got to know, and we did a couple of podcasts, and we're both interested in how the UFO phenomenon ties into the Kennedy assassination and possibly Watergate. And we're looking at declassified documents, some of those documents that were not declassified, but they were leaked, and there were some declassified documents. So we did a podcast and we looked at, this is my first attempt at AI, by the way. We looked at things like an MJ-12 connection to the Bay of Pigs invasion, Kennedy assassination, Watergate, and the alien presence. So I won't go into that right now, but without saying too much about that, that might be a reason why it happened in Cuba. So we also looked at the Twining White Hot report, which looked at reverse engineering of these 2 craft in Roswell that crashed, and they weren't called UFOs; they were called ULATs, unidentified lenticular aerodyne technology. Wasn't known that acronym's not very well known. Anyone heard of that acronym, ULAT? No one knows about it. So there is a document in the White Hot report that names Landing Zone 1 and Landing Zone 2, or Crash Zone 1, Crash Zone 2, and that mentions ULAT 1 and ULAT 2. And it mentions the propulsion method in the craft. So it mentions the actual details of the propulsion method. So using possibly nuclear fusion technology. And we believe that all of this, and probably the Roswell documents. So where are the documents relating to the Roswell crash? Anyone want to hazard a guess? There aren't any. They're gone. Okay, they never were. Well, Stan Friedman looked at that, and also the governor for where Roswell is. What's the state? New Mexico. The governor Schiff also tried to get the General Accounting Office to actually find any documentation relating to Roswell, and they said there's nothing there. So where is it? It's possibly under the Atomic Energy Commission Act, which Schumer tried to recently get to. So there's a missing link to Cuba, and we don't quite know, but we're trying to work out a theory as to how Havana Syndrome's related to Cuba. Why did it happen there in the first instance? It's a bit like a supermassive black hole in the middle of a galaxy. The whole thing with UFOs and history, because in the middle of a supermassive in the middle of a galaxy, you've got a supermassive black hole. You can't see it; it's not visible, but its effects actually affect everything around it. You know, all the stars and solar systems. It affects all of that. So it's a bit like that. So where did it happen? It happened first when Obama normalized relations with Cuba, because there was the Cold War, and Cuba, the Americans weren't, there weren't many diplomats there, there weren't many people there from America at all, really. I mean, you could travel to Cuba, but Obama was saying, well, why are we still having a Cold War with Cuba? Let's normalize relationships with Cuba. And so this is a video of him actually on TV announcing the normalization of relations with Cuba. Oops, why is that not working? Here we go.
Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba. In the most significant changes in our policy in more than 50 years, we will end an outdated approach that for decades has failed to advance our interests, and instead, we will begin to normalize relations between our two countries. Through these changes, we intend to create more opportunities for the American and Cuban people, and begin a new chapter among the nations of the Americas.
Just a few hours ago, this communist nation welcomed President Obama, who became the first American president to visit here in 88 years.
We felt like we were part of history in the making. It was impossible not to feel that way.
Starting in 2016, U.S. diplomats and spies who were serving in Cuba started experiencing these strange sounds and physical sensations, mostly in their homes in the Cuban capital, and then started coming down with these bizarre, unexplained symptoms.
We heard the strange cicada sound at our house, I would say 2, 3, 4 nights a week for 30 to 60 minutes over the course of several months.
I think when we went out on the porch and made that recording that night, you got hurt. It was persistent, very, very loud. I was always sitting in our bedroom in front of those French doors with just glass between me and the sound. I didn't have a sense that it was dangerous.
Okay, so that just gives you a brief look at some of the people that were actually involved, but I want to just go to patient 0, the first person to have been recorded as hearing a sound and being affected by that sound. And he was an intelligence officer, but I'm going to show you an audio, but it's 10 minutes long. I might cut it short because you might get a bit bored with it. But this is the very first person that got involved, affected by Havana Syndrome. It's interesting to know his account.
I was a U.S. government employee that was affectionately referred to as Patient 0. I was down in Havana in 2016 when all the attacks started happening.
So what were you told your job would be?
I can't discuss that.
Okay, so it wasn't a diplomatic job.
And this is hard for me because I have to walk a line. So I was a U.S. government employee stationed in Havana.
At a time when the U.S. and Cuba had restored diplomatic relations.
Correct. For me, I was going home. I wanted to take the most challenging thing I could take.
The Cuba office, which Tony was part of, has been something of a backwater within the CIA for years, a very low priority. Partly because Cuban intelligence was so good, it made it hard for the CIA to do its job. But that's changing just as Tony is getting ready for his assignment on the island. The office is part of the Western Hemisphere Mission Center, which recently got a new chief of operations. He's a tough-talking veteran of Russia House, the CIA office that runs covert operations in Russia. And he wants the CIA to be more aggressive across Latin America, including in Cuba. He tells case officers things like, if you aren't getting surveillance 24/7, you aren't doing the job right. He wants the CIA to take the gloves off in Havana. We asked the CIA for official comment on this, but they declined. In many ways, Tony is a perfect candidate for a job like this. He's totally green, which you'd think in any other job disqualifies him. But green CIA officers are often the best, because this is their first deployment. Foreign adversaries haven't tagged them yet, and they have something to prove, so they go in hungry, and they are willing to take risks.
And you can expect that if the CIA is now going hard on Cuba after not doing so for so long, Cuban spies aren't going to like it.
I was hit pretty hard and pretty heavy right off the bat.
Tony said he felt like they had it out for him from the start, which was bizarre, because he was supposed to be the green officer, the one they didn't know about.
There was a guy that sat outside my driveway in a plastic chair 24/7. They rotated with a radio.
Cuban counterintelligence officers would literally follow Tony and other Americans around the island. But if Tony managed to lose them, to get in the black, as they say in the business, the Cubans could track their cell phones and find them.
They use your phone as beacons. So anytime I came and left from my house, they'd radio me and then car surveillance would pick up, or they'd use camera surveillance and do point to point.
Cuban intelligence would do other things to just mess with suspected spies and diplomats who they saw as a threat.
They'd defecate in your house, cut your internet lines, they'd drain your water cisterns. You only had water every couple of days.
I've been hearing stories like this for years. Spies go to crazy lengths to tell their adversaries, we've got our eyes on you.
Before my time, they killed people's dogs. They urinated in mouthwash. They put feces on your door handles so you'd come and grab them. They'd flatten your tires, or they'd do some sort of damage to your car. This was just part of this long game of them always letting you know that they're there, letting you know that they can get to you. But also, they want to find what gets under your skin, and they exploit it. For someone like me, that level of harassment was awesome. It made me happy because I felt like I had joined a club, they hated me, they knew that I was being good at my job. Like, they would use the harassment and the surveillance to send you a message that they were upset with you. If you played by their rules, they kind of left you alone and you got to do things. If you weren't playing by their rules, or you were pulling stuff and they weren't happy with it, they would let you know.
Tony's there for about 2 months when he experiences something new and frankly terrifying on December 29th, 2016.
We were on a skeleton crew at the embassy as a whole because everyone had cleared up for the holidays or New Year's. And I'd come home, and my pattern was to come home and then go to the gym. And I would usually come home and watch a few episodes of the downloaded show or something. I'm just laying on my bed with my laptop, like on, next to me, and I'm watching the show. I'm in my dress clothes, I'm in a shirt and my suit. And then all of the dogs in the neighborhood started barking. They would bark periodically, but I'd never heard them all go off at once. And I think that struck me immediately as unusual. And then this loud sound just blasted into my bedroom. I guess my gut reaction was that it was LRAD.
Long-range acoustic devices. Ships sometimes use them to ward off pirates. These days, police officers in the US use them to ward off protesters.
They can blast loud sounds at a distance that make it very uncomfortable for you, to the point that you just have to get out of the beam of what it is.
But he doesn't move.
And so my assumption was that this was just the next iteration of harassment, right? So it seemed like they were trying, in my mind, to get me annoyed. And I'm incredibly stubborn. And so my whole plan was to not do anything.
He doesn't want them to think that whatever they're doing is working. So he's pretending that he's not affected by it. But he is.
And it just ratcheted up, and it got really uncomfortable. It started very, very loud, like ear-piercingly loud, and then I thought, okay, well this is obnoxious, because you can't hear, the show anymore, so you put captions on, and you don't want to show any sign of discomfort, because if there is video in the room, they're watching that.
This goes on for about 20 minutes.
But then there was the physiological pain, and so the pressure started in the head, and then the discomfort in the ear. I just picture those old wood vices in, shop class in high school, right? It just felt like someone was just turning that, my head was in it. Then the severe, severe ear pain started. So I liken it to like, if you take a Q-tip and you bounce it off your ear, like that, you get that jarring, like, ah. Well, imagine taking like a sharpened pencil and then poking that off the eardrum. And so at that point, I then took a pillow and wrapped it over around my head. So my left arm had the bulk of the pillow against my left side, and then I was using my right hand at the top to kind of block the pillow on the right side of my ear. And frankly, it did nothing. Like, it didn't even start to mitigate anything.
Move from the bed?
So no.
Because
that would have been a smart thing to do.
And you didn't go to the window and look out either?
No. I assume they're watching, if not, they're listening.
I might leave that there. So patient 0 was an American intelligence officer stationed in the US Embassy in Cuba. He was in his apartment one night in December, probably December 30th, 2016, almost 2017, heard a strange sound, dog started barking. He described hearing this sound and crushing pressure in his head and massive ear pain, causing his nose to bleed. Sound stopped after he moved to another residence, but the symptoms remained and the nosebleeds just wouldn't stop. So I'm going to just skip through that. That's him again, but we don't need to see that. Let's look at some interviews with other victims. So these are other people who have experienced, this is only about 6 minutes long.
With an incredible case of vertigo. The room was spinning. I wanted to throw up.
Mark Palomaropoulos, a former U.S. intelligence officer at the CIA, was hit in 2017 by an invisible attack in a Moscow hotel.
I've been in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. I've been shot at, but this was by far the most terrifying experience of my life.
Palomaropoulos created a Superman mask in art therapy, thrusting a dagger through Superman's skull to represent the headaches which had changed him. The CIA agency seal cracked.
The night of my event, March 17th, 2017, I was standing at the kitchen window. I was washing dishes. And in the midst of washing the dish, all of a sudden, I felt like I was being struck with something. And it was an overwhelming sense of anxiety, pressure, completely inexplicable, and then pain. What one of the security officers had said to someone else just a couple of days before. Look, we don't know what's happening, but if you think something's happening, get off the X. And I heard that in my head, get off the X. And it was almost like I had been unplugged and a spell was lifted, and I moved. And that was it. I kind of just walked down the hall and dazed.
I started with the vertigo and the tinnitus and that brain fog. I could actually feel my brain shutting down, like everything kind of went black. I'm standing and it's feeling as if I'm being pushed, like you're being smashed from the top of the head into the ground. That particular symptom, it was many months after I had come back to the States before I started feeling that one.
Neurologist said to me, he says, Kate, what you've got here is, it's as if you aged 20-something years, and you have those changes all at once.
Something had happened to me, and the more I ignored it, the worse I got. It had gotten to a point where I quite literally wasn't functioning as a person. I couldn't remember anything. My head was in so much pain. My ears were ringing. We all had different sensations. We all heard different sounds, or in my case, didn't hear anything at all. Why? Why are they so different?
One theory that we bounce around sometimes is maybe they're experimenting with dosing, right? So they hit some of our people with a really strong blast. In our case, it felt like whatever they were doing was farther away, like a lower intensity thing.
Are we guinea pigs? Are we test mice? A little bit, felt like it.
People started to raise the possibility that this was psychosomatic, that it was mass psychogenic illness.
Several of us went to the security office. We listened to the sound that they had recording, and I'm like, wow, that's the sound I heard. They were pretty much, no, you know, you're wrong. You're not, you didn't hear that. So that was the start of trying to figure out how to get people to believe me.
I don't think anybody wants to be a victim, but there's nothing in the world that's worse than being a victim that everybody doubts.
I actually got a call from someone in the State Department, and he said, "Is this Dr. Hoffer?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Dr. Hoffer, this is the State Department, we have a problem."
Dr. Hoffer was able to do a lot of testing, especially on the delicate inner ear organs that govern balance.
If you take the whole group, that they uniformly had dramatic damage to the otolithic organs, which are the gravity organs. So not just a little bit abnormal, all of them were abnormal.
As more and more cases emerged, the government realized they were going to need one facility that was able to really evaluate any new case that came forward. And that's where the University of Pennsylvania came in. The doctors were able to determine that the Havana Syndrome individuals had brain injuries that were very similar to a concussion. They found that the Havana Syndrome brains had less white matter and less connectivity in them. And that led to what doctors started to refer to as a brain network disorder.
I still didn't completely believe it. And I would ask Dr. Swanson constantly, are you absolutely sure this can't be psychosomatic? And he would say over and over, yes, for sure. There are certainly some components that could be argued away, but there are others that can't be. And it's those that make us know that this is real and not psychosomatic.
I think I was at my peak when I first got to Cuba, and then it went downhill from there. I see myself, and there isn't any physical problem that I can see, and I'm still seeing me, but it's not me. And so it's depressing, and it's overwhelming, and I'm still trying to deal with it.
I spent about 9 months trying to do my old job, little pieces of it, a few hours a day, and I felt sick all the time. I had horrible headaches all the time. I had to grieve it because it's a loss. I am not the woman I was before when I went to Cuba. I'm not that person anymore. I had to go back to the department and say, I think I'm broken permanently.
When Dr. Galloway told me that I couldn't make my eyes work together, it was the first time that someone had said, you know, this is sort of the smoking gun. This is your proof that you have suffered some sort of traumatic brain injury without actually being hit in the head. I finally realized that it was over. There is no more career. It's just try to keep working, try to keep contributing in some way. I work 2 hours a day, if I'm lucky. I don't manage, I don't lead. Everything that's happening for me is happening below the surface. It's 4.5 years of excruciating headaches. It's 4.5 years of stumbling, losing my balance. It's 4.5 years of vision degradation. People don't understand what this kind of brain damage can do to you.
Symptoms are not what we have. We have injuries. So it is all in our heads in the sense it's a brain injury. It's inside my skull, but it's not imagined.
I do not believe the department took me seriously. It was always, we'll get back to you. If we ask for more information, we'll get back to you. I have to ask myself, are they trying to disprove us, or are they trying to prove what happened?
Right, so hopefully you've got a better idea about now what Havana Syndrome is from those interviews. So it's pretty serious. There's a lot of people get brain injury, and it debilitates them to the extent that they are not able to function at the same level that they were before. And these are really high functioning people. They're diplomats, they're intelligence community people who are spies, and very intelligent people, and brought down to a level where they can maybe function for 2 hours a day. So what's causing that? All they're hearing is a sound, and all of a sudden, they get these symptoms of nosebleeds, headaches, balance loss, vertigo, but it develops into a brain damage, and it can never be repaired. So it's really quite serious, and there's hundreds of people involved in the States, possibly thousands. You don't hear much about it, do you? So let's look at the medical side of things, and I'm not going to bore you with too much of the scientific side of things because it can get a little bit complicated. But this is the guy who you need to know, Dr. Michael Hoffer. He was the first medico to have seen the very first cohort of people, group of people with Havana Syndrome when it first broke out. It's very important because that first group of people didn't hear about Havana Syndrome. The term wasn't coined, and also if it's mass hysteria or if it's psychogenic, it's by word of mouth. One person says, "Oh yes, I heard a sound and I got headaches and whatever." Basically, that can spread, and then other people think they've got it. They hear a sound similar to that. But he is a brain trauma expert, and he's stationed at Miami, which is close to Cuba. He had a security clearance, and he's a professor of otolaryngology and neurological surgery, and specialised in mild traumatic. So a perfect person to look at these people. And there was about 35 of them. So the most significant cohort was what he looked at. These were naive patients. In other words, they just experienced something, didn't hear about it, went to the doctor or went to hospital and got diagnosed with some symptoms, but nothing specific. So they weren't affected by anything to do with media coverage, and they're irreplaceable. That first group of people that Dr. Hoffer looked at cannot be replaced because now it's out in the media and everyone knows about it. Okay, so that eliminates psychogenic causes. So Dr. Hoffer, in the interview, he said it's an unknown cause. It causes vestibular and cognitive dysfunction. So signs and symptoms were of the acute injury patients that he examined. They hear an odd sound. There's a pressure phenomenon. If they moved, it'd follow them in the room. What on earth is that? What can follow you in the room? If you're hearing some sound, it's going to follow you around in the room, except when they open the door, apparently. Shortly after, they would get a pain and ringing in the ears, and then trouble with balance and memory loss a bit longer, bit later on. When that a few weeks later maybe. The objective testing abnormalities ruled out psychogenic illness, so it cannot be psychogenic illness, can't be mass hysteria, because of the fact that there's absolute proof by looking at their MRIs and saying, well, look, they've got white matter damage, so it's absolutely not psychogenic illness. And he spoke about, in that interview, the otolithic organs. The otolithic organs are in your ear, in the middle ear, and so here, the otoconia are like little stones in your ear, and most animals have them. Basically, they're made of limestone and covered in protein matrix. And what happens? They help you understand your balance, so basically where you are in space. So if you didn't have those, you probably wouldn't know, you couldn't balance yourself. Also, they help you with linear acceleration. If I walk, I know that I'm moving forward or moving backwards and at what rate. So they're very important, and that's why if they're damaged, well then you'll get problems with balance and vertigo and all sorts of things, dizziness. So they're damaged, and how on earth does this sound damage the autolytic organs? So Dr. Hoffer's findings were, he did hearing tests, and there was no hearing loss. So no hearing loss, but autolytic organs damaged. The patients lost their balance. That was due to autolytic organs. So if they're damaged, you're going to lose your balance. Other thing. They did testing as well for the vestibular system, and they did neural pathways between the vestibular, cognitive, and emotional changes were affected in these people. His conclusion is that Havana Syndrome is not a typical brain injury. So there's nothing in the textbook that says, okay, if they've got this white matter loss in these particular parts of the brain and neuronal loss, there's nothing in the textbook that describes this, nothing in the medical literature. What is known is that there's an injury to the ear, which is the autolytic organs, but the brain's affected. But guess what? There's no connection for the injury to go from the ear to the brain. So how's that possible? It's just ridiculous. It's unbelievable how weird this thing is. Let's look at microwaves. Now, microwave radiation, because, you might think it's the Russians. Basically, they might have been using microwaves, focused microwaves with this. They can be portable now. Microwaves used to be the size of a container, a shipping container. But now they've got them down to a certain size. Could it be that? Could it be something that's been focused onto these people and it's a fine focus microwave thing? No. So the medical profession has actually eliminated microwaves because one thing. So microwaves do damage to your brain. They can affect ion channels on the membranes of the neurons. They can cause reactive oxygen species to break down DNA and proteins. But the problem is they don't do peripheral nerve damage. The peripheral nerves are the nerves that come from your brain and your spinal cord into your limbs and other organs. So there's no peripheral nerve damage. How's that possible? If you're going to hit somebody with a microwave, you're going to affect the brain and all the peripheral nerves. That doesn't happen. It's just the brain. And in very specific areas. Just to get to, just revise what grey and white matter is. This is a coronal section of the brain, and you can see here, I've got it marked here, white matter. So white matter is just nerve fibres. So they're the fibres that come from your nerve cells. And it's located in specific areas, and the grey matter is the actual cells, the neurons. Okay, so that's the distribution of neurons and white matter in the brain. So what gets affected is the myelin sheath. So the axons get affected. So the nerve cell has an axon, or it's got a root, and it goes to a muscle or goes to another nerve. So the nerve fibres, so these things here, okay, are covered with what's called the myelin sheath. It's like an insulation. If you look at electrical wire, if you can imagine electrical wire with an insulation around it, that's very much what it's like, except it's got gaps, and those gaps are called nodes of Ranvier. And that's where the signals from the neuron go, they skip the myelin sheath and go into the next node. So that's what's affected. So there's an electron micrograph, a scanning electron micrograph, and there's a nerve fibre, and there's another smaller one, and it's this stuff here in purple, or is it pink, that's affected. So it's the insulation around the axons that's affected. Inside you've got neurofilaments and microtubules. They are not really involved in the transport of the electrical impulse, but they could be affected as well. And that was the actual journal that was mentioned in that video, the Journal of the American Medical Association, of JAMA, we know it better as. That was a seminal publication which found, they studied a certain cohort of patients, and they came up with these conclusions that basically there was white matter loss. So white matter loss meaning that the damage was done to their nerve fibers. The JAMA results were a significant difference in whole brain white matter volume, regional white and grey matter volume, so affecting the nerve cells as well. Cerebellar microstructural integrity. Your cerebellum's at the back. It helps you with smooth muscular movement instead of being a robot. You know, it smooths out your movements of your muscles as you move. It's affected as well, and it also the functional connectivity between in the auditory and spatiovisual subnetworks. So the anomalous findings were that the changes seen in the patient cohort of this investigation did not conform to any known pathogenic mechanisms, nor did they form an anatomical basis for a specific behavioural dysfunction observed in other brain disorders. How is that? Like, am I hearing this right? You know, as a neuroscientist, I'm thinking, what? How could that be possible? Neurological similarities between Havana Syndrome and UAP close encounters of the third and the fourth kind. These two guys, I'm sure you've heard of the one on the left, Gary Nolan. Anybody know Kit Green? Anybody here have heard of Kit Green? A lot of you must have, yeah. So Kit Green and Gary Nolan. Gary is new on the block, but Kit Green had looked at cases of people who had been exposed to radiation effects on close encounters and UAPs. So that was his specialty. He had a high classified clearance level. Gary Nolan, also recently, if you listen to his podcasts and things, he was interrupted by the CIA apparently, and he was, you know, a whole pile of MRIs was dumped on his desk, and they said, "Can you figure out what's going on here?" And he had a look at them, and basically some of these cases, he said, were Havana Syndrome cases. Some of them were people that were had a close encounter with a UAP of the third or the fourth kind, and there were similarities between the two. This is the little table that I drew, and there's not much difference between anomalous self-incidents or Havana Syndrome and close encounters with the UAPs. Loss of memory, amnesia, loss of concentration, memory loss, unsteady gait, vertigo, dizziness, nausea, headaches, disorientation, insomnia, visual disturbances, tinnitus, hearing loss. So very similar, except for a couple of things like paralysis and unconsciousness. You might say, well, they're all symptoms, you know, like people have those symptoms all the time. But it is remarkable how closely related they are. And that's from the National Academy of Sciences, plus another database that I got that from. So UAP, close encounters, and Havana Syndrome. So UAP-related injuries resemble Havana Syndrome-like effects. Some UAP close encounter victims die following exposure. There's no recorded deaths of Havana Syndrome, but apparently 3 suicides. So they got Havana Syndrome and committed suicide because they couldn't handle it. UAP close encounters are inadvertent exposures. In other words, you get close to a UFO, and basically if you get irradiated by it, that's the way you're going to suffer the physiological effects from. So it's the radiation coming from whatever that is, from a UAP. Whereas Havana Syndrome is intentional, it's targeted. You're sought out, they know who you are, where you are, and bang, you get it. You get a dose of whatever they're giving you, and it causes something similar to a close encounter with a UAP. It causes mild traumatic brain injury, and it's an immaculate concussion. So what do they mean by immaculate concussion? If I hit my head with a hammer, that would not be an immaculate concussion. I'm deliberately doing that. But this is no hitting the head. It's just we see brain damage, but there's no actual concussion with it. So what you're seeing in the Havana Syndrome is sort of similar to a car accident being next to a bomb that's exploded. And how's that possible? Impossible, really, but they've got it. This is Ron James, who's being interviewed on a podcast by Julian Dorr. So he's going to mention a little bit about Gary Nolan's work. It's only a short video. But the difference between what Gary Nolan meant by the basal ganglia and how he has seen the MRIs of people that have a lot more nerve fibers in the basal ganglia, who are actually more intuitive and actually see UFOs more often than what anyone else would. So there's some of us in the crowd here that have this thing. Maybe I have, I don't know, I've seen a UAP, as a teenager. But he's going to make that distinction between the basal ganglia finding and also the findings that he had seen in the MRIs of the Havana Syndrome cases.
But basically the way he summed it up to me, as best as I can remember, is that yes, I was given all of these MRIs in this brain scan technology. I was able to find things that correlated, and I was able to identify that yes, this was an injury to these people. And so at that point, he said, I didn't study it any further. I don't know who's doing it or where it came from. But that was a different framework than what he discovered with the basal ganglia in people. It was two different things. And so he started to find these anomalies among certain people. And it was about the same time he was doing the Havana stuff. So he was able to kind of correlate different things going on in the brains of different people. And that's when he stumbled on it. He literally stumbled on it. The basal ganglia research, it was something that he found by accident.
So it's not mass hysteria. How can it be mass hysteria? Okay, it's physical damage is done to the central nervous system, and there's blood markers as well. Details of patient 0 are classified, and a second cohort of individuals developed Havana Syndrome without knowing about that first person that got the Havana Syndrome. And there was no communication, so how can it be psychogenic? As I said before, mass hysteria works by word of mouth. Mass hysteria is often associated with this, it's not as often associated with a specific cohort. Why? Why are the US intelligence community and diplomats only targeted? It's weird. Across the globe. Simultaneous experiences. So how can it be psychogenic? Sometimes the person can be in a house, right, when they've got a wife and kids, and they all get it simultaneously. So Johnny in another bedroom upstairs will have a nosebleed while the father and the mother are holding their heads on a headache from this sound that they're hearing. So mass hysteria, let's eliminate that. Possible causes or actors. Let's look at chemical very quickly. 2016, the Cuban government fumigated to eradicate Zika virus. It coincides with the Havana Syndrome. Could it possibly be the chemicals? So there was a study that looked at this, and they said, oh yeah, it's the organophosphorus insecticides. But there's a couple of problems with that. So they said that the cholinesterase inhibition in a neuromuscular junction, that's what it was doing. But they only looked at 20 Canadians. Isn't that interesting? What a great cohort for the study like this. This is just a little video that someone took at the time with their mobile phone of the fumigation on the streets of Cuba. So a lot of fumes coming out onto the streets, trying to get rid of Zika virus. But really, was that, could it possibly be the chemical? Well, why did it only affect the Americans in Cuba and not the Cubans? None of the Cubans got Havana Syndrome. How is that possible? So they couldn't prove the source of the toxin and that it caused the injury in this publication. So it's a rubbish publication. No sound associated. Only 20 Canadians were actually used in the study. Reasons why Cuban population, why didn't the Cuban population get neurotoxic symptoms like the Canadians did, that they studied. Just ridiculous. Why did US diplomats and intelligence community develop Havana Syndrome in other countries that weren't fumigated for Zika virus? So we can cross it out. Absolutely no way it's chemical. The sound, let's listen to the sound, and let's do a deep dive into the sound, because I think that's where the key is. And there's a little video here that's just going to start explaining the sound to you, and then I'll start talking after it, obviously.
The recording gives us the first tangible sense of what it was like for these American government workers in Havana who were hearing these unexplained sounds in their residences and later developed physical symptoms. Americans who heard these sounds in Havana have described slightly different sounds, and even in some of the recordings that the AP has reviewed, there are slight variations. However, this high-pitched cricket sound seems to appear in all of them. The U.S. Embassy in Havana has played these recordings for Americans who are working there so they know what to listen to. These recordings have also been reviewed by people who heard the sounds firsthand in Cuba, and they confirm that the recordings are generally consistent with what they heard. We still don't know what is causing the sound, and the recordings don't appear to have significantly furthered the investigation. Even with the recordings being analyzed, the U.S. government still says it has been unable to determine what is causing the sound.
You won't be hearing it, but of course it is going into your system. It's like acoustic hammer which is hitting you. You're just not able to hear it because its frequency is much higher. So there were some concerns to it, and if it is really, really high, it could create some, what we call as a bioeffects.
It's possible that what we're hearing on the recording is actually only part of the picture. Traditional recording devices are only able to pick up certain types of frequencies, such as the ones that the human ear can hear. It's possible there are additional frequencies, possibly those too low or too high to be picked up, that are also happening when these attacks occur.
All right, so there's a sound, and it sounds like a cricket. All right, could it be a cricket? So anomalous, hitherto unknown sound or cricket. There it is. So it sounds like a cricket, but is it really a cricket causing brain injury in people? I've never heard anyone heard of a cricket causing brain injury.
Play it backwards. They sing the prayer. Oh, what's that prayer? Have you heard of the cricket song?
No, I haven't. No.
Play it backwards. It's the Lord's Prayer.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's the Lord's Prayer being played backwards, and it's okay, but it doesn't cause brain injury, I'm sure. So these two guys are entomologists, and the one on the left, Alexander Stubbs, heard the sound. So that first video that you heard was the Associated Press recording of the sound, right? Because there was a person that actually recorded it and gave it to the Associated Press, and they said, here's the sound that I heard that caused my brain injury. These two guys, the one on the left, Alexander Stubbs, heard the sound, and he said, I think I've heard that sound before. He says, I went to a field trip in the Caribbean as an entomologist, and I heard a cricket that sounds very similar to that recording that you took that caused the brain injury in these people. So they did a publication, and they looked at the spectral distribution of the sound waves of the cricket. And they did a publication on it, and the cricket's called Aneurogryllus cerebranictus. That's a mouthful. There it is there, and it occurs in the Caribbean and in Cuba. All right, it's calling song. It's also called the Indies short-tailed cricket, and it matches in nuanced detail the Associated Press recording. So could it be a cricket? Or could it be that the Associated Press recording could have recorded that cricket, or did they record something else, some other sound? It's exactly the same in terms of, well, nearly exactly the same as in terms of duration, pulse, repetition rate, pulse rate, stability, and oscillations per second. So there's the sound. I hope you don't get Havana Syndrome. Good luck. No. So it's really high-pitched, metallic, but if you were hearing it, if it was getting into your brain, it'd be causing a lot of damage. There's a spectral analysis. The top one is the Associated Press recording, and there's the cricket sound, the echo of the cricket sound. If it's in the field, so if you found a cricket in the field and you recorded it, you'd get this recording down here, which is not quite like the Associated Press recording of the sound. But the echo, what do they mean by echo? It means that the cricket's sound has got to be played in a room with tile floor, nothing on the walls, and through a loudspeaker. So that's how they get that sound. And here, this is a pulse structure of the AP recording, and you can see the Associated Press recording of the Havana Syndrome sound. And down here, this is the echo of the cricket sound, which is sort of similar. In the field, it looks very different. The waveform looks very different. So I'll play the two sounds. So the one on the right is left on the Havana Syndrome sound, and the one on the left is the short cricket, tail cricket. I don't know whether I can do that with this. Let's see whether I can.
Americans who heard.
Very similar. What happened in 2017 with the crickets is that there was a Cyclone Irma. I don't know whether anyone remembers Cyclone Irma. It was one of the biggest cyclones ever in that region. And it started in the Atlantic Ocean, which is really weird, very unusual. Usually it starts in the Gulf of Mexico or down here in the Caribbean Sea and they go up. This one started in the slightly cooler waters of the Atlantic, and it ripped through Cuba, the Bahamas, etc., and went up there, and it carried the crickets. The crickets get picked up, and they go, like miles high up into the air and get distributed down into the United States in different states. So the original distribution of the crickets was in Cuba and the Bahamas, but then after Cyclone Irma, they got pushed right up into the United States. And there's the distribution there. So they're still in Cuba and the Bahamas, but they're now at the bottom, most of the bottom of the United States. But look at the distribution of the Havana Syndrome cases. Cuba, yeah. Germany, there's no cricket in Germany, not like that. China, no crickets in China that are the short-tail cricket. Russia, Austria, United States, Poland, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Colombia. So they're practically in every continent except Antarctica. So basically, the crickets are not found anywhere apart from Cuba, the Bahamas, and the United States, the lower part of the United States. But they're getting Havana Syndrome everywhere around the world. So it's not the cricket. Cannot be the cricket. Absolutely cannot be the cricket. Yet the sound sounds exactly like the cricket. There were a couple of cases in Australia. So there were a couple of diplomats that came over from the United States and got hit here in Australia. Not much detail on them. In fact, somebody tried to put a FOIA in. I found out that somebody tried to lodge a FOIA here in Australia to find out exactly, are there any letters, notes, emails on these two people that were hit in Australia, and they got rejected. They got the 24A thrown at them, which is what you get a lot of the time. They said, no, we couldn't find anything, How could you not find anything about this? It's probably classified, but so if they were hit here in Australia, they would have got medical treatment, they would have been hospitalised, there'd be emails, there'd be records, but the FOIA office says there's nothing. The sound, is it a red herring? Is the sound emanating from the cricket only, or is it from a sonic weapon? Some of the victims here heard nothing, yet they sustained injury. So is the sound real? And the cricket sound being used to subvert the real agenda. In other words, is somebody or something using that cricket sound as a ploy to actually deliver the damage. Isn't that weird? But it's not coming from me, it's coming from the Jason advisory panel. Who's Jason's advisory panel? They're one of the most elite scientific organisations in the world. Based in the United States, 11 Nobel laureates, and most of them are astrophysicists, engineers, named after Jason, the mythical figure Jason, and everyone's seen Jason in the Argonauts, I'm pretty sure. So named after Jason, founded in 1960 by, after the launch of Sputnik. So it was when the Russians launched Sputnik, they had to put a committee together with elite scientists. So they looked at Havana Syndrome, looked at it in depth and made 2 reports. So, as I said, independent group of elite scientists which act as advisory group for the United States government, usually on matters of a sensitive nature. Consists of physicists, biologists, chemists, oceanographers, mathematicians, computer scientists, predominantly theoretical physicists, 11 Nobel laureates over the years. They did this report, and where they looked at the acoustic signals and physiological effects on United States diplomats in Cuba. And they made this really, it was like, the report's got a lot of redactions in it, but this little segment here I found, this is what made me look at a connection between extraterrestrials and Havana Syndrome. The Jason Advisory Group is considering, this statement's regarding the Indies short-tail cricket sound, and it says, it cannot be ruled out that the perceived sounds, while not harmful, are introduced by an adversary. Notice I didn't say foreign adversary. Adversary as deception so as to mask an entirely unrelated mode of causing illness in diplomatic personnel. And I thought, what the hell? I thought, so something is using that cricket sound as a ploy to actually deploy its energy beam on US personnel to effectively use that as a ploy, as a cover. How can that be? So who or what has selected an insect sound waveform to disguise an initial assault on the US intel community? Is it this guy? I don't know. Let's rule out the cricket. So it's not the cricket, we know that. But the cricket has a role to play. The cricket sound was being used, but it's not the cricket. Because why would the entire population of Cuba not come down with brain damage after listening to these damn crickets for, hundreds of years? What about a foreign adversary or friends or foe? So basically, could it be Russia? Could it be China? Could it be another nation? Are foreign adversaries actors in Havana Syndrome? I looked at the National Intelligence Council investigation. So there were 7 intelligence agencies within the United States that looked at Havana Syndrome. And this is what they did very quickly. They looked at the laptops and cell phones of the people that were affected, and they looked for compromised malware or tampering. The FBI interviewed foreign intelligence staff and specifically asked if they were involved. They interviewed third-party countries like China, other countries to say, was Russia involved? No, we don't know if Russia's involved in this. Identified causal mechanisms, what could possibly cause it. They looked at dark websites, looked for leads. They also reviewed audio-visual evidence from the victims. They also deployed sensors and detecting devices in strategic locations to detect signals of interest. Geographical and physical infrastructure of the locations was analysed. The list goes on. They looked at everything. So let's listen to this guy. This guy's Michael Isikoff, not that guy. That's Dan Abrams. But he's interviewing Michael Isikoff, who actually does a podcast, and he has interviewed people with Havana Syndrome, and he's interviewed people in the intelligence community, and this is what he's got to say about a foreign adversary causing Havana Syndrome.
Michael Isikoff is host of Conspiracy Land, a new podcast series that has spoken with high-ranking government officials and former members of the intelligence community who are increasingly doubtful that outside actors are behind this. And he joins us now. Michael, thanks a lot for taking the time. Appreciate it. All right, so talk to me about why this became a thing that seemed so certain for a while, and why there's now so much more skepticism about it.
Well, first of all, people did get sick. There's no question about that. And some people are still suffering. And in our Conspiracy Land podcast, we interview some of those people who are experiencing real cognitive issues, real problems, as a result of illnesses that have never been adequately explained. No question about that, and there's no reason to question or doubt the sincerity or the veracity of people who have reported some of these symptoms. But that said, every single one of those clips you played at the start of this segment, there is simply no evidence to back any of it up. The CIA task force appointed by Director Bill Burns went all over the world investigating every one of these incidents, and they concluded they could find no evidence of any foreign involvement, any foreign attack in any one of these instances, even in the ones where there are perplexing ongoing symptoms, including brain injuries, that some people have suffered. So the media has adopted this. It's a conspiracy theory that is essentially evidence-free at this point. What weapon? Who is wielding it? Where does it exist? What does it look like? These are phantom weapons involving phantom attacks. I've talked to senior officials, some of whom, by the way, started out believing there had to be something there. John Cohn, who's chief of intel at the Department of Homeland Security, interviewed on my podcast. He says he was a believer at first. The more he looked into it, the more he studied the evidence, the more he looked at everything that was out there, and he concluded it's just not there. Show me the facts, he says. Show me the evidence, and nobody ever could.
So what he's saying is that there's absolutely no evidence. They couldn't find any weapon anywhere, nobody holding a weapon, nobody deploying anything after all of their research. In any instance, not one single instance in the Havana Syndrome case did they find anything. So, but it's not psychogenic, it's not the cricket, it's not chemical. So here's another video. Former FBI Assistant Director, this is very quick, of the Counterintelligence, Frank Figliuzzi, on Havana Syndrome. So let's listen quickly, just hear what he has to say.
So whoever's doing this is sending a message. We can do this wherever we want, whenever we want, and you can't catch us.
Well, Frank, U.S. officials seem to think it's the Russians. They seem to think it's some sort of directed energy attack. But there's nothing definitive, no real answers. It's been 5 years. Is there an urgency now to figure this out?
No, obviously not. So basically, they're just at a loss. The US government is absolutely at a loss as to what is going on. More stuff that the NIC did. So they reviewed a range of technologies to duplicate what happens. They did CCTV footage around the buildings of the affected individuals. Never found anything on the CCTV footage. Did 3D scale, 2-scale models of the incident locations where they were developed to support the hypothesis testing. They did building floor plans, furniture, electrical device locations, also analysed. The list goes on. They did 3D reconstructive maps of line of sight analysis around the world. Around the world. This is not just in the United States. Around the world, performing hundreds of surveys, determine if they could connect a foreign adversary to causal mechanism. They ran license plate numbers on individuals located near the incidences through the CCTV footage, and we're going to be finishing soon for our break. And following investigations of the National Intelligence Council rated the likelihood of a foreign adversary very, unlikely. That's what they came up with after a 2-year massive investigation into Havana Syndrome. So we're going to be breaking soon, but just to recap, they don't know what's going on at all. So we'll leave it there and then we'll have a break and come back. Thank you. Right, great. So Havana Syndrome is not caused by an energy weapon, and it's no foreign adversary, according to the intelligence review findings by the CIA Director William Burns, said that one of the largest, most intensive investigations in the agency's history. So that's since 1947, just after the Roswell crash, the CIA was formed. So since 1947 to now. Is he lying or what? I don't know. So journalist Josh Lederman broke the story of Havana Syndrome, but let's just have a quick look at this.
NBC's Josh Lederman has been following the Havana Syndrome story from the start and broke the CIA story for NBCNews.com. Josh, it sounds like the case is not yet closed.
Not yet, Kelly. Far from it. It's really important to understand what this CIA report does and doesn't say. The CIA is saying that this notion that's out there that hundreds of Americans in countries all over the world are being attacked by a foreign power is unlikely. Now, they're not saying that they've concluded that Havana Syndrome is all made up or that no one was attacked. And so what the CIA is saying here in this report is that they are narrowing their focus to a few dozen cases where they can't find a good explanation, and they think those cases might offer them the best chance of uncovering any involvement by a U.S. adversary if it does exist. Now, we know in the past that the U.S. has suspected a directed energy weapon and potentially some involvement by Russia. Moscow, of course, denies that. But this report, casting doubt on the majority of cases, is still really a sharp turn by the government. The Biden administration has said over and over that they're taking this seriously and that staffers should be able to come forward to report suspected incidents without any kind of stigma. And that's why lawmakers like Senate Foreign Relations Chairman Bob Menendez are asking, why now?
But let's just cut that short. So the Washington Post in March 2003 published an article saying that Havana Syndrome, not caused by energy weapon or foreign adversaries, intelligence review finds. So no evidence to suggest it's an adversary, has used a form of directive energy, such as radio waves or ultrasonic beams. They've tested that. That's fallen down that hypothesis. In some cases, there's no direct line of sight. So how do you get that beam into that head of that person that you want to target without a direct line of sight? It's just so weird. Analysts found no evidence of an adversary targeting personnel. So I had some questions to ask myself. Who or what on earth could outwit, now this may sound a bit tongue-in-cheek, 7 intelligence agencies to the extent that it would leave no trace of evidence apart from its injuries to its victims? That's assuming there's an actor involved. Who or what on earth? I don't know. How does the perpetrator know how to target a victim without a direct line of sight and go undetected? How does the perpetrator know how to use a subtle form of injury to incapacitate the victim without disclosing the mechanism? Conclusion. The intelligence of the perpetrator is off the Richter scale. In other words, it's not human. Non-human intelligence. It has to be. How can it get away with all of this without anyone detecting anything if it's an actor? So it's not a foreign adversary. Last possible hypothesis, the unspeakable. What's the unspeakable? An extraterrestrial hypothesis, an actor. So the extraterrestrial actor hypothesis, which you may laugh at, but I've shown you the evidence, have a listen to this. This is Tim Burchett during the US congressional hearing talking to David Grush. He's going to mention something about Havana Syndrome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Earls, for great questions, brother. Mr. Grush, I might have asked this before, but I want to make sure. Do you have any personal knowledge of someone who's possibly been injured working on legacy UAP reverse engineering?
Yes.
Okay. How were they injured? Is it something like a radioactive type situation or something we didn't understand? I've heard people talk about Havana Syndrome type incidences. What was your recollection of that?
I can't get into specifics, but you could imagine assessing an unknown unknown. There's a lot of potentialities you can't fully prepare for.
How do you think we ought to handle UAP whistleblower complaints like yours and that?
So I'll just stop it there. So he's saying that, I've got a feeling that Congress has an idea about Havana Syndrome in their heads as well, but it's all classified and they've got a theory of it being possibly extraterrestrial. So what has the media published? I didn't find much, but this is a Miami Herald publication saying US investigated energy weapon, even aliens. So they did investigate the hypothesis that it could be extraterrestrial. But Havana Syndrome origin still unclear. Okay, so how did they investigate the alien hypothesis? I don't know. More publications. Reuters. The agencies even considered the possibility of extraterrestrials responsible, but ruled it out. A US intelligence official told reporters in a briefing. So they ruled it out, but how did they rule it out? When they did the foreign adversary thing, they gave us all the methods and all the sources, right? They excluded extraterrestrials, but where are the sources and where are the methods? Never published. Why? Why? Oops. This in the Daily Mail Australia. They woke up burned or injured. Top brain expert and ex-CIA officer reveals hundreds of military servicemen suffered brain damage or symptoms of the mysterious Havana Syndrome and even death after encountering UFOs. So that's just basically something that's probably referring to Kit Green's work. So that this reporter actually interviewed Kit Green and found a similar correlation that I did. This in the Jerusalem Post. Anybody read the Jerusalem Post? You do? Congratulations, that's great. American security from aliens to Havana Syndrome and cyber attacks. So they're mentioning it, they're lumping it together with Havana Syndrome, but not directly connecting it. It just happens to be in the title. And Vanity Fair, UFOs, Havana Syndrome, lab leaks, the post-Trump news cycle is stranger than fiction. Well, yeah, it does seem like that. So the media reports state that the intelligence community panel looked at the extraterrestrial hypothesis and excluded it. How? So the media only allowed, now get this, the media was only allowed to interview intelligence personnel about the ET hypothesis under total anonymity. In other words, they weren't allowed to disclose who it was or the agency. So I don't know how they kept their silence, but the media is completely stonewalled in even disclosing who they spoke to about this. If the IC panel did look at the ET hypothesis, what were the sources and methods? I already mentioned that. Nothing's published. While the methods and sources were used to determine the foreign adversaries were involved, were declassified. I asked myself the following questions. Is there evidence to support the hypothesis that Havana Syndrome is caused by an extraterrestrial actor? What motive would an extraterrestrial actor have to disable United States and Canadian intelligence diplomats and personnel? What's the motive? Why are they doing that? If it is extraterrestrial, why are they doing it? patient 0 affected in December 30th, 2016. Is there anything significant with that date? Does anything sort of like tie up with it? The UAP, in the UAP field, so did something happen in very late 2016 or early 2017 or maybe mid 2017? Oh, there was the release of the UAP videos from the Pentagon in 2017. It was May, so it wasn't quite, doesn't quite correlate, but almost. But was there something developing? So, and also the New York Times publication, who can forget that? Who can forget that? It went viral, and it went viral, and it went to the mainstream. I even asked my brother-in-law. He wasn't interested in UFOs, but he heard about it. First time in history that UAP video confirmed as legitimate by the Pentagon. They didn't admit it then, but they admitted it later in 2020. That yes, it is legitimate video of a UAP. This is a Colin Kelleher. I'm sure you might have heard of him. He was part of NIDS. This is him talking about the pivotal year 2017. So don't forget that Havana Syndrome started December 30th, the patient 0, December 30th, I think, 2016, so it's almost 2017.
The Pentagon has had a long history of avoiding the UFO topic, and it's almost like they've been in autopilot for decade after decade, where all of this material, all of this evidence has been buried deep, very, very deeply, and it has never seen the light of day for decade after decade. And then in 2017, when the New York Times broke the story, December of 2017, New York Times broke the story about our program, the Defense Intelligence Agency program, plus the Tic Tac case, it kind of blew this sort of complacent arena of secrecy. It blew it out of the water. And the years since then, it's been sort of the Pentagon and the Department of Defense have been playing catch up with the events that have unfolded. You had the UAP task force that was originated in the United States Navy, that was around the 2018 timeframe, 2017 timeframe, I believe. And that was a really proactive scenario within the Department of the Navy, where a lot of pilots were being interviewed regarding UFOs. But the UAP task force did not last very long. It was the leadership of the UAPTF was disbanded pretty quickly because the Pentagon bureaucrats did not like what was happening in terms of the UFO topic itself starting to surface in the media, which is what they had been successful in burying the previous 4 or 5 decades before that. And then the genesis of the early version of AARO was an organization called AOIMSG. As the Pentagon loves these acronyms, I can't even remember what the name AOIMSG, but it was formed as a follow-up to the UAPTF. And so AOIMSG was under the wing of the USDI, the Office of the USDI and Security, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is the exact opposite agency that you ever want to be involved with the UFO investigation, because it will never happen, because they've had decades of practice at slow walking and keeping it secret. And then AOIMSG evolved into AARO. So you've got a sort of a legacy of decades of secrecy where the real hardware is buried deep within the bowels of the Pentagon and deep within various aerospace contractors. And that's the way it has been for decades. So the idea of sort of waking up this slumbering beast, which has sort of started to happen in the last 6 years, I think it's a very long-term project to actually have any kind of success, because I think the Pentagon is used to, essentially blowing this UFO topic off. And the standard line from the Pentagon since the closure of Blue Book in 1969 has been that the United States does not investigate UFOs, it has no interest in UFOs. UFOs do not constitute a national security issue for the United States. Therefore, public is invited to move on. There's nothing to see here.
So, ever since 2017, when those naval videos came through, we had congressional hearings for the first time in 50 years. And it's been moving at a very fast pace. So we had another congressional hearing, and so things are really moving compared to, say, 50 years of nothing after the closure of Blue Book. This is the statement made by the Department of Defense saying that the unauthorized, well, actually it was first of all unauthorized in 2007, but it wasn't mainstream, these videos. And then in 2017, the videos were handed to Chris Mellon. So it wasn't disclosed to Chris Mellon. I did contact Leslie, and she said, no, Chris didn't. He got them from a third person. So he gave Chris the videos, and so they were leaked unofficially. And then you had the publication in the New York Times. And then later on, the Pentagon said, okay, well, they were released unofficially, but now we're going to officially say that, yes, they are official naval videos. In 2020, that was April. And then basically they're saying that, yes, they are unidentified. So I looked at a timeline. So I tried to work out, is there a correlation between people getting Havana Syndrome and slow leaks of disclosure? So I looked at that, and I come up with, oh, sorry, this is me emailing Leslie again, and I said, look, do you know when the videos of the Pentagon, she didn't know exactly what month Chris got them, but I can imagine that basically there was a development before they were released, if you know what I mean. So something as big as this, there'd have to be some significant lead up to that before, Chris had actually leaked them out, and then the publication in the New York Times happened. So the timeline of significant UAP developments and correlated to the incidence of Havana Syndrome by the media. So I looked at that and I came up with this table. So this is sort of like a table of, at the top we've got the year and the month and the event. So this is pre-Pentagon UAP video leak developments, leak of the Pentagon videos, and this is how many Havana Syndrome patients that were actually diagnosed. I don't have statistics for December 2017 and April 2020, but let's go through it. So December 2016 was patient 0. There could have been some development about the Pentagon release, the release of the naval videos at that stage by Chris and the third person. May 2017, 35 people identified with Havana Syndrome. Leaks of the Pentagon videos to Chris Mellon probably happened then, in May. December 2017, got no statistics, but New York Times publication of Pentagon UAP videos happened then. This is the New York Times publication. Again, no statistics for April 2020 when the DOD said, yeah, they're authentic. October 2021, we got 200 people, and there's the ODNI preliminary assessment. So they're taking notice. So the ODNI and the DOD, they're saying these things could be dangerous. They could be a threat to national security. All of a sudden, we've got 200 diplomats affected. So, and then in May 22, we've got 1,000, and the first congressional hearing happened in 50 years. So maybe there's the reason there why they're covering up the statistics, is because they don't want anyone to find this out, a correlation between the incidence of Havana Syndrome and slow leaks of disclosure. So is government disclosure of non-human intelligence a factor in UAP transparency? is there a battle for UFO transparency between the deep state, these guys here, the Majestic 12, they're not called that now, but the deep state? Is there a tug of war between Congress and them? I think there is. A massive, massive struggle at the moment. Happened first in the congressional hearings. So is the deep state dictating to Congress, don't push this, because if you do, there are consequences, and they're not coming from us. They're coming from somewhere else. Is non-human intelligence opposed to disclosure of its presence on Earth? Maybe that's why they don't want us to know about, you know? Is it just that? Do you remember Haim Ashad? He did there was a publication in the, I think, the Jerusalem Post again, where he said that there is an alien. I forgot the word for it now. I'm getting tired. I'll just run the video. I'm sure you'll remember this. It was not so long ago.
Aliens exist and President Trump knows about it. That's according to Israel's former space security chief. In an interview with an Israeli newspaper, he said the aliens have been waiting until today for humanity to develop and reach a stage where we will understand in general what space and spaceships are. NBC News chief global correspondent Bill Neely explains this one.
Hi Alison, well this is quite a story, and it comes from the man who headed Israel's space security program for nearly 30 years. Haim Ashad is making the extraordinary claim that the United States and Israel have been in contact with a group of aliens for years, not immigrants, but extraterrestrials. He has called them the Galactic Federation of Aliens, and said President Trump is aware of the existence of these aliens and had been on the verge of revealing their secrets, he claims, but was asked not to do so by the Federation in order to prevent what he calls mass hysteria. Well, the retired general said the US and Israel have kept it from the public because, quotes, humanity isn't ready and the aliens don't want to reveal themselves until humanity can evolve, he says, and understand what space really is.
Okay, I'll stop that there. So basically what Haim Ashad, so he's a very qualified person in terms of, he was involved in the space industry in Israel for quite some time. He was part of the US program as well. And he's stating that part of the agreement between the extraterrestrials and humans and us is that secrecy is an absolute must. So if we are disclosing things about them, and which is what has been happening since 2017 till now, I think they're angry about that and they're retaliating. So what sort of experiments was he talking about? So I cut that video short, but what Haim Ashad said is that they don't want us to disclose their existence to the general public because they want to they think it will cause mass hysteria, and also they want to continue on with their experiments. So what sort of experiments are they talking about? What do we know about the human abductions? Yep, pretty well. Cattle mutilations? I think so. Hybridization experiments? Maybe. Crop circles? Psychological experiments? Probably. So I love this term, catastrophic disclosure. It's been mentioned before, but I interpret it differently. So it's a Pandora's box. If you open reveal the presence of them as legitimate, you're opening up a Pandora's box because all these other questions about them happen. You know, if you acknowledge the fact that they are here, then if you dig deeper into the phenomenon, you'll go into these other areas like cattle mutilations and other things, human abductions, etc., etc. This is an interview with this guy. So this is the Good Trouble Show. I don't know whether you watched that podcast, but it's only a fairly new one. But they're talking about Chris Mellon's talk at the Soul Foundation. Anybody hear about the Soul Foundation yet? Conference in 2023. So It was organised by Gary Nolan and another guy. He's talking about the problems with disclosure about ET's presence. So just listen to what they say, because they're discussing what Chris has said. Chris's video is available on YouTube, but so they're going to be discussing that now. So.
One of the things I would say that stuck out in my mind is he said this could potentially be a massive Pandora's box, and we should all be extremely careful what we wish for.
It's scary. He brought up the point, what if disclosure changes the NHI behavior or the government's reaction? Things could spiral very quickly, as many of the other speakers alluded to. Our top priority is to keep people safe. Are we doing everything we can to do that? No politician would want to have that press conference if something bad happened. They're in it, for self-preservation, probably to, they want to get reelected. So politicians tend to be very risk-averse, but there is a very real risk of doing nothing. And I think he made that very concrete.
So what he was saying is that would disclosure affect the behaviour of non-human intelligence? And I think Chris knows a lot more than what he's making out. So is there any recent evidence that NIH responds when provoked? Let's have a look at case number 1. I was involved in this case. It was a UFO that was found over the waters of the Atlantic Ocean. And it involved 2 investigators, and they were filming the UFO and flashing it with an IR beam. So it was only seen on infrared. So you couldn't see anything out in the ocean. It's the middle of the night. So I was involved in interviewing these 2 guys. I call it the Long Island incident in 2022. Well-documented incident where a UAP is spotted over the South Atlantic Ocean by 2 field investigators. They're on the shore, on the beach, right? And they're looking out there, and they see this UAP, they're filming it, and then they're flashing it with their beams, their IR beams. So it's the middle of the night, the UAP is just sitting above the ocean, about 1 kilometre away, and they know it's a UAP because they know it's not a plane, it's just hovering, just above the water, just hovering, and they know it's nothing natural, nothing prosaic. The UAP can only be seen in infrared. One of the investigators had an infrared torch and they flashed it several times. Whoops, ran the wrong way. So the UAP retaliates by sending a beam through the water, and it actually comes up to the shore, and the beam temporarily paralyzes the 2 researchers, so they just fall on the sand. This is all caught on video for the first time. So this is the first recorded instance of a UAP beam incident caught on video, where there is compelling evidence that a beam from a non-human source interacted with humans and their technology in an adverse way. I know there's other instances, but these 2 guys were field investigators with the Galileo project. So they're very, very well-versed scientists. This here is the beam. So if you see that there, I'm going to show you the video. So they're going to be flashing the UAP with this beam here. So it's an infrared beam, and they're filming it with an infrared camera. So it's a UAP over the Atlantic Ocean, and there's the 2 of them. I've just taken a screenshot of that. But the first video is not that long, but it's going to just give you an idea of what they're talking about. Actually, I might skip that one. This is Ted Rowe, but here I've taken a still frame of the UAP. It's not very clear, but there it is there. It's above, the water's probably around about here, and it sent out this blue beam. And this is the video. Now, before I play the video, it's very grainy, and what is probably happening is that the UAP is jamming their infrared. So it's very blur, very confetti-like. And you'll see one of the field investigators flashing his infrared beam on the UAP, and then you'll see a beam coming towards the shore. And then you'll hear, one of the field investigators will drop his camera, and then he'll fall to the ground, but you won't see that, unfortunately, because the other guy's holding a different camera. So they're brothers, and you can hear him say, he was telling him to move, and he says, I can't, meaning that he was paralyzed waist down by the beam. So this is legit. This is absolutely 100% legitimate video. And they've done a publication on this. Well, we're doing a publication on this that'll be put through the SCU. So let me just stop it. So so I hope I've explained that correctly. So it's very grainy, and they're going to be talking through it as well. So they're on that side, and they're just reviewing the video and telling you what's happening in the video. Oops, sorry. Let's go back. So there's the UAP. So there's the beam. There's the IR beam that they're shining on the UAP over the. We can see the waves. So there's the UAP there. Very.
Fascinating. These things are hovering just over the ocean. It's either 3 objects or 1. Yeah. I mean, they're very close to the surface. Let's see, I can walk a little further out there.
Very grainy, sorry about that.
Alright, so I'm right at the beach edge here.
So they're going a bit closer into the beach, and they're going to flash it again. The waves. There's the UAP.
Do we know what the aspect is? I forgot my digital.
So they're flashing it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's going to come in a minute. It's going to send a beam out. Let's look for a blue beam. There it is. See that? Oh, maybe not. There it is. You see that blue flash? It's just sent a blue beam.
I see it.
It's coming towards the shore. And he's just dropped his camera. So it's just paralyzed him, waist down.
What?
Saying it can't.
I don't see it, Todd.
So the beam is going through the camera. It's actually turning it off and on and switching the settings in the camera.
I don't know if you guys saw that chevron pattern. I'm going to try to stop that frame.
So they're just discussing that, yeah. So it's just going to do a still frame of the chevron beam that they found in the camera. There it is.
Now this is infrared.
This is infrared.
It was invisible to the eyes. Yeah, and this chevron pattern of light actually expanded. We actually have a tracker software that we can look at this frame by frame. There's about 3 frames in there, and you'll see this light grow very.
So basically, both of them got affected. So they were only temporarily paralysed for 1 minute, but they said it seemed a lot longer. Absolutely legitimate, and basically what the beam did was stop the impulse going down the motor neuron into the muscle. So it's got some mechanism where it actually can go into your body, and it knows your anatomy inside out. So it knows how to stop neural impulses. We're not quite sure. We're doing a paper on this, but it can work out how to temporarily paralyze you for a very, and it's not known in the literature. You can't have temporary paralysis. So why I showed you that video is that this is proof that if you taunt a UAP, it will sometimes retaliate with a beam. This is what happens in Havana Syndrome. So we're taunting it because we want to disclose its presence, and it doesn't want to have its presence disclosed. This is what I'm thinking. It correlates really well. Second case, Thomas Winterton and Skinwalker Ranch. You remember him? Anyone? Obviously, a lot of people would remember Skinwalker Ranch and Thomas. So he was involved. Not involved. However, I wasn't involved in that, obviously. I did email Brandon Fugel, and we do communicate, but when I emailed him about Thomas, nothing. Didn't want to communicate with me. So Thomas's injuries, however, he didn't reply. But Gary Nolan did have a look at his injuries, and it was because of the digging on Skinwalker Ranch that the injuries apparently correlated with digging, and apparently the digging was something that they got warned about not to do for whatever reason. Maybe there's a UAP that's under the ground. That's the hypothesis. But he did receive an actual injury, because there's the MRI, and Gary Nolan had a look at it and says, yeah, definitely. He received a bit of brain damage as well. And this is what Thomas posted in his Twitter, or it's called X now, that his Twitter post in 2021, he said, because my head injury happened during the same time period with similar symptoms and injuries, any articles regarding Havana Syndrome always catch my attention. So, provocation of a UAP, and then he gets zapped. Politics of Havana Syndrome. What has the White House got to say about it? They've been interviewed by the press on occasions, and let's have a look at see what Kamala Harris has got to say about it, and Jen Psaki. This is Camilla, obviously. She's avoiding the issue. Have a listen to what someone from the press is going to ask her at a conference. And she was going to Hanoi, right? So this is 2022, I can't remember which month. But before she got on her plane, 2 of her staffers got zapped in Hanoi, giving her a warning, don't go there. So where have you heard that before? The jet fighters were finding the UAP, the Tic Tac, and all of a sudden it's 60 kilometres away and it knows your cap point. So this is what happened to her. Listen to
One of the Associated Press. Hi. Thank you, Madam Vice President. Before I get to my question, I think it's important to follow up on the Havana Syndrome incident that delayed your travel here. Do you have any sense of who's behind that? And considering that these incidents have happened all over the world over the past 5 years, what do you say to diplomats that are concerned for their safety? And is the U.S. doing anything to address that situation? And then I have a follow-up on Afghanistan.
Okay. On the issue of the health incidents, and we call them anomalous, as you've mentioned, health incidents, I will tell you that we're looking into it. And I'm not able to share much more at this time, but on your point about embassy staff, I met with them today, and then also saw them yesterday during the lease signing ceremony. And I will tell you that the people who work in our embassies, be it here.
Okay, I'm going to stop her there because I've had enough of that. Basically, she's avoiding the issue. Thank you. She's avoiding the issue, isn't she? And nervous laughter to start off with. And yeah, we're looking into it. Oh, big deal, you know, I mean, what does that mean? We're looking into it. What about Jen Psaki? She's even worse. Have a listen to this.
Clear guidelines, clear best practices, and the private sector to take steps to harden their own cybersecurity.
And one last question: has Wales learned anything more about these possible cases of Havana Syndrome in Vietnam?
I don't have any more information. No. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Jane. What has Congress have to say about Havana Syndrome? I'm going to cut this a bit short, but this is Senator Shaheen. She's actually really interested. The Congress is really interested with Havana Syndrome, and she's questioning Avril Haines, who was the former the director of the CIA. I don't think she's now Bill Burnsies. But let's have a listen.
Director Haines, I would like to begin with you because I'm sure you've seen the report on CNN today that suggests that there were at least 2 possible incidents on U.S. soil of the directed energy attacks that have created symptoms sometimes called Havana Syndrome, and a number of our personnel. One of the incidents described here happened on the Ellipse in late 2020, and that's very close to the White House. So I'm not going to ask you if that report is correct or not, because I recognize that there has been a real effort to try and keep this information classified. But I do want to ask you about the concern that I had that kind of clamp down on information that's available to Congress, that's available to the public, has led to leaks, and it's not clear whether the information we're getting is correct or incorrect. And so I wonder if you could speak to that and to what more can be done to declassify some of that information, share it with members of Congress in a way that allows us to better respond. After all, we have to fund operations, and there are a lot of personnel, not a lot, there are personnel who have been harmed, we need to make sure get the care and benefits they need.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your attention on this issue. It's critically important, and it's something that I know General Barrier, I know across the intelligence community, frankly, leaders are focused on this issue. On your particular question with respect to information, I'd be happy to look at this with you, to be honest. I think I completely understand that getting the information is critical for you to be able to respond to these issues and ensure that you're able to make good decisions. Maybe we can talk more about this also in closed session on these questions. And I think, our concern obviously with the classification is because we believe that either it's protecting sources and methods, and it's critical to our national security, and we'll have to figure that out with you, but you should certainly have access to the classified information, and we should figure out if there's a way to help you address these issues more granularly.
Okay, so massive effort to keep the information classified, clamp down on information to Congress, and the public has led to leaks. Not sure if Congress is getting the correct information, what can be done to declassify. DNI is willing to talk under closed sessions. Doesn't that remind you of something? The UAP? The parallels are amazing. Classification is to protect sources and methods. The National said, well, it's not, because basically you've disclosed that it's not a foreign adversary. So pushback from FBI. Recently, get this, in September last year, the New York Times has taken the FBI to court over a FOIA exemption on Havana Syndrome study. So the FBI did a study on Havana Syndrome, and the New York Times wants access to it, and it's gone to court. So the FBI do not want to give it give the information to the New York Times. Currently, it's under camera review. You know what that means? So if under camera review means that the judge has to see the document and determine whether there's anything of national security in it before he decides to allow the back the plaintiff or the defendant in this case, and the plaintiff is the actual New York Times in this case. So it's still ongoing. I haven't heard anything about it, but this, like, why do they have to take the FBI to court, to get this information? Judge Oatkin is actually looking at that at the moment. I don't know of any updates. Still one question unanswered: why Cuba? Recently declassified documents from the CIA revealed what really happened in Cuba before the Bay of Pigs invasion. Now, this is just a theory that I had with that ASIO guy, and we were talking about it, but it relates back to something that happened in the 60s. So, and we're thinking that this reintroduction, the normalization that Obama did, hit a raw nerve with non-human intelligence by reintroducing Americans back into Cuba. And it relates back to this technician who was employed by the CIA. Anyone heard of David Christ? I didn't think so. So he was imprisoned in Cuba for trying to plant a hearing device in the Chinese news agents. The Chinese news agency in Havana, Cuba. This is where he was imprisoned, the Isle of Pines, I think it's called. So all these little cubicles is where the prisoners, it was a horrible, horrible prison to be in. But he was caught with two other people trying to put a bugging device in the embassy. And basically, we think that he was involved in a reverse engineering program. And what I mean by reverse engineering is UAP reverse engineering program at the time, and he was involved with nuclear fission and fusion, and with another guy called, with another scientist called Zabrowski. So basically, what we think happened is that there was a document relating to what the Cubans extracted from him under torture, relating back to the Roswell crash, which was he was involved in reverse engineering somehow tenuously with that, and he was interrogated, and the Cubans then were trying to give that information to the Russians. So he was tortured and gave the information to the Russians. Is this so? And then it relates back to the Watergate scandal. So basically, what we think happened. So, what's your opinion of the Watergate breaking? Was it because of what are your ideas about the Watergate break-in? No one's really put their finger on to say, yes, well, this is why they broke into Watergate. There's no real answer to it, and we think it might relate to the documents that were put together from this guy being under torture about the reverse engineering program. Why did they have two Cubans with them when they broke into the Watergate building? It's because it was written in Cuban Spanish, and they wanted them to translate it. And so, did the DNC actually have that document stashed away in the Watergate building? This is the Twining White-Hot report, which mentions the landing zone 1, which relates back to the Roswell crash. So the two craft that crashed. This is an alleged document that describes where they crashed and what they saw when they looked at the craft in terms of engineering. And it was rated by, this is the Ryans, Bob Ryan and his son, Woods. Ryan Woods and Bob Woods. They rated this document extremely high in authenticity. And it relates back to Kennedy assassination, because in '63, let's look at this briefly. I don't know how much time I've got left. We'll have a look at this anyway.
In 1960, John F. Kennedy becomes the 35th President of the United States. As the country celebrates this rising star of politics, few outside Washington, D.C.'s inner circle know the extent to which Kennedy quietly deals with the danger that Eisenhower had vaguely described in his farewell address. Danger that some say related to government secrets about UFO technology, Area 51.
Having a warning from a president that's walking out the door. He came out swinging. He was not a fan of the intelligence community.
I think that there was a definite problem that was going on in the interpretation of the UFO phenomenon and how to deal with it. Kennedy's main problem was that he was perceived as unreliable to the national security establishment on a whole array of fronts, including the UFO issue.
A year and a half later, the Cuban Missile Crisis takes the United States to the brink of nuclear war with Russia's Soviet Union. And despite Kennedy's secret negotiation with Moscow to avert war, tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union remain high.
Kennedy understood that this could never happen again, that he had to develop a new relationship with Soviet Russia to keep these two countries from coming literally to the brink of World War III ever again.
To achieve this goal, Kennedy secretly issues a memorandum requesting that NASA initiate broader cooperation between the United States and the USSR in outer space, including cooperation in lunar landing programs. The memo is dated November 12, 1963.
He felt that the differences between America and the Soviet Union could be resolved in a peaceful way, and he felt the strongest way to show that to everyone was to cooperate in an area where they had unique capabilities and mutual interest, which was exploring the moon together.
But the fine print in Kennedy's bold initiative also means sharing classified UFO secrets.
This idea of collaboration in the space program clearly set off alarm bells with MJ-12 and some parts of the administration. And the concern was that we have alien technology here. We don't want to share it with the Soviets.
And that was the last straw. That was the thing that the National Security State, the CIA, Allen Dulles, MJ-12 absolutely could not tolerate.
I mean, my goodness, the idea of sharing UFO data with the Russians, no, I don't think that they were on board with this.
And for MJ-12, sharing UFO secrets was a big problem. Their response may have been pulled from a fire. When and where, nobody knows. Like all MJ-12 documents, the authenticity of this burned memo is considered suspect by mainstream historians. But for UFO researchers, this 9-page document is explosive new evidence never before seen on national television. Page 1 refers directly to the president. As you must know, Lancer has made some inquiries regarding our activities, which we cannot allow.
Each president is given a nickname of sorts, and this is for security reasons. And Lancer is absolutely John F. Kennedy. This was a classic conflict between the president and the intelligence community. And it was showing to be beyond the control of any president.
And perhaps the most chilling page of the burned memo states, when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment, and Washington cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation. It should be wet.
That's an old Soviet phrase. Wet work means that's when you kill people covertly. It's a very kind of careful way of describing if Kennedy doesn't play ball real soon, he's got to be taken out.
So obviously what must have happened is Kennedy started asking about aliens, grays, UFOs, the whole thing, and MJ-12 took a vote and decided we have to get rid of this guy.
If the burned memo is authentic, as believed by UFO experts, the conflict between JFK and those in possession of UFO secrets within our government were on a collision course. According to UFO investigators, since World War II, the U.S. government has known of countless UFO sightings and encounters that were probably caused by extraterrestrial beings. Yet every president has barred disclosure, except for one, John F. Kennedy. Might his desire to divulge secrets related to the UFO phenomenon set the stage for a dire confrontation?
Kennedy was pursuing policies that really were at odds with the national security establishment. He was sticking his nose into the UFO subject, and that's the final straw. Can't let that happen.
President Kennedy had expressed the view that the US government should be sharing technology. And if there was alien technology in the mix, that would have been on the table too. Some people might have gone to any lengths.
Okay, so did NJ-12 knock off JFK because he wanted to share not only this, the research in outer space with the space programs, but also their UFO information. And if that's correct, it's just a hypothesis. It may or may not be correct, but this document is an interesting one, which is just a draft, and the draft ones don't go into circulation in the CIA, even if they're classified. So it mentions, I can't read it from here, but it mentions that Kennedy was interested in sharing research in outer space with the Russians, and also he wanted to share information about UFOs just in case one of them, and this was his idea, that basically if one of them's mistaken for a Russian missile, it could cause a nuclear war. So this is the burnt memorandum which they mentioned, and it's interesting to know that basically anyone heard of the 3 tramps at the back of the grassy knoll? When no one's heard? Yeah, you have. Yeah, great. That's great. Good on you. There were 3 tramps found in the back of the grassy knoll in a train, a tram or train. I'm not quite sure, but they were arrested, and because they were actually, police didn't know what they were doing there, and in a train. Yep, thank you. And they were well-dressed tramps, so that's suspicious. But one of them, you can't see him here, but his shoes there, is E. Howard Hunt. Anyone heard of E. Howard Hunt? Yep. And I think this guy, I'm not quite sure, I can't remember his name, sorry, I'm not very good at history. But I think it's this guy here, is his name, his pseudonym is Daniel Carswell, but his actual name is David Christ, the guy that I was talking to you about before. So what were they doing there? Watergate link, June 1972. Was it because of the Pentagon Papers? Really? Daniel Ellsberg? I don't know. Daniel Ellsberg was apparently, really worried about a nuclear apocalypse. He photocopied 7,000 pages of the Pentagon Papers. Took him a year because it was, one page after another, and he probably got some eye damage. Leaked to the New York Times, and of course the resignation of Nixon. But was the break-in because of that? I don't know. I mean, there's one piece of the puzzle that doesn't quite fit. The document was written. So this is another. We're thinking there's another reason why they went into the Watergate building is to get a document that was written in Spanish-Cuban that was meant to be sent to the Russians. So apparently the Democratic National Committee did have it in their headquarters. This is just a theory, maybe wrong, I don't know. There was a link to the Kennedy assassination. Kennedy wanted to share UFO data with the Russians, and MJ-12 was against it. So if there's a smoking gun in the Watergate building, that's going to imply Nixon's involvement in Kennedy's assassination relating back to the UFO phenomenon. Well then, yeah, they want to get it out of there. So E. Howard Hunt here and his lawyer, I forgot his name, Caddy. I forgot his first name. Douglas Caddy? Yep. Douglas Caddy. So listen to what Douglas Caddy had. He had a meal with E. Howard Hunt, who was one of the who was jailed because of the Watergate break-ins. Sorry, as I said before, I'm not very good at history, but he was one implied and he was jailed. And when he got out of jail, he wanted to get had one last meal with Douglas before he went off. I don't know where he went off to, probably Cuba. And basically, Douglas said that he wanted to ask him a question, and that was, why was Kennedy assassinated? And he also asked him about the Watergate break-in, and these are his answers. So listen to Douglas.
Let me set the stage. What year is this?
This is 1975.
Okay, 1973, you're having this conversation. What year was the election?
1972.
1972. The Democratic candidate for president was?
George McGovern.
George McGovern. Even an old hardcore Democrat like myself didn't give George McGovern much of a chance of being elected president.
Right.
But they thought that maybe in the Watergate office there was some incriminating information about the Kennedy assassination that could be used as a last-minute secret weapon in that election?
Yes, that would actually tie Nixon indirectly to a chain of events to the Kennedy assassination, which historically is true.
Yeah, Kennedy was in Dallas Nixon was in Dallas when Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas.
But, so we had our dinner, and then we kept it sort of light after that, you might say, and we discussed, about his children and my circumstances and so forth. And so we walked out, and on the street, I decided, well, there's one more, before Howard leaves, who knows when I'll see him, I got to ask a couple more questions. I pressed forward, and I said, Howard, why was Kennedy assassinated? Why was this information so important? And he said, Kennedy was to give our most vital secret, was about to give our most vital secret to the Soviets. And I was startled by that. Kennedy was going to give our most vital secret to the Soviets. I said,
our most singular vital secret.
And I said, what was that? And he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, the alien presence. And with that, he shook my hand and walked away.
So Douglas Caddy didn't really understand what he meant by that. What does he mean by the alien presence? And he spoke to some people in the UFO circle, and basically he learnt a lot, and then he finally, the penny dropped and said, oh, yeah, I know what he's talking about now. So was Kennedy assassinated because he was about to reveal to the Russians their most vital secret, which is the reverse engineering program of UAP, the Roswell crash? I'm pretty sure there was Cape Girardeau, a few other, maybe a couple before Roswell, but I can imagine if there was a document that was incriminating in the Watergate building, that they would be after that, definitely. So my discussions with the former Australian Secret Service agents, Douglas Caddy and Howard Hunt, about why they broke into the Watergate building. Hunt replied that there were Cuban government documents that implied Richard Nixon with the JFK assassination. Caddy asked, what's the connection? Hunt didn't elaborate about that. He said, what's the connection between those documents and the JFK assassination? Because obviously it would have related to MJ-12 knocking off JFK for wanting to actually share the reverse engineering program with the Russians. The alien presence statement was made. Were these documents one of the ones extracted from David Christ under torture by the Cubans? Did the documents contain information about nuclear fusion and reverse engineering of extraterrestrial spacecraft, ULAP 1 and 2 in Roswell? Why would normalization of the relations between United States and Cuba result in an anomalous neurological assault to the North American intelligence community and diplomatic community? Was someone or something trying to give the US government a clear warning that this move was not acceptable? Oh, what a tangled web we weave. This Walter Scott says it very well. What can we expect next? The Schumer-Rounds amendment was gutted. Why? You know, did they have something to hide? Obviously. Has the government been told in no uncertain terms by NIH, the non-human intelligence, that they should not disclose? Is the government protecting us from repercussions? Non-human intelligence if we disclose? What could be the next phase of pushback by NIH if we disclose? Will disclosure come at a greater than expected cost to humanity? Is ET messing with our heads? Maybe. So my take-home message is, could NIH have the capability to control us all in a similar way? In other words, will we all get Havana Syndrome if we continue down this line, which is scary? My advice is, don't poke the hornet's nest too much. Thank you.